Last month, I made a video about Dennis Prager's use of the King David story as a way of defending political leaders who behave badly. The logical conclusion of his comments was that we should tolerate misbehaving leaders, even leaders who murder their lovers' husbands, because God tolerated King David. Of course, I'm sure if it were put to him that way, Dennis would not say that a known murderer should lead our nation. I may be giving him more credit than is due here, but that hope got me thinking. I used to be really good friends with Dennis, who, despite what you see there on PragerU, my alma mater, go Devils, is an intelligent man. So how does an intelligent person end up saying and thinking such stupid things? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Dennis stopped being a seeker of truth years ago, choosing instead to become an apologist. And apologetics is about one thing and one thing only: defending a given position or belief come hell or high water. The value or veracity thereof is secondary. You just defend at any cost, and you do that because you don't or can't question the position or belief at hand, either because such questioning is not allowed or because such questioning would cause an unending series of questions which may ultimately unravel one's entire worldview, and that kind of existential threat is something very few people are willing to endure. That's why the skill of a good apologist is so highly valued. I've told this story before without using Dennis's name, but I became an atheist while Dennis and I were still very good friends. Having realized that I didn't know the arguments of the other side, something Dennis had warned me about, I went to a library, checked out a book, and almost overnight lost my faith. It was probably the most terrifying week of my life. I called Dennis in an absolute panic, desperate for a meeting with him, assuming he'd be able to rescue me from Nietzsche's abyss. But when we finally got together and spoke, it became clear that A, he didn't really know the arguments himself, and B, was emotionally resistant to the arguments, feigning an inability to understand what was now so clear to me. I backed off quickly as I didn't want him to fall into the abyss with me. I felt my life unraveling, and I wouldn't have wished that on anyone else at that time. Once I stopped challenging him with these various arguments, Dennis told me how important his faith was to him. It was almost like a Mormon testimony, if you're familiar with that kind of thing. He said to me in a very personal and direct way what I'd heard him say on the air any number of times. If I didn't believe there was a God, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. Hearing it this time, having truly understood the arguments of the other side, I realized how pathetic that comment was. And I don't say that as a put-down. I felt true sadness that someone I knew and loved felt so emotionally enslaved to an idea. And I understood that there was absolutely no way for Dennis to consider the alternative. Such an idea would have been emotionally and probably financially crippling for him, having built both his personal and professional life around the idea of God's existence. But this kind of desperate emotional need to believe something makes it impossible to see things clearly. We probably experience this most frequently in relationships, where we refuse to see an ugly truth about someone we love. This is something my friend Bob and I called reasoning from want. When you want something to be true, you will accept almost any defense thereof. It's a basic cognitive bias. You shut down your critical faculties because you really just want an answer. It doesn't have to be the answer, just any answer, so long as it makes you feel okay again. When you believe what you believe because those beliefs make you feel good, all you really need is for that good feeling to continue, which leads to the rejection of any information which makes you feel otherwise: puzzled, concerned, afraid, doubtful. Back when I was a Mormon, I bought a 2-tape lecture series by a guy who had supposedly studied the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi library, claiming to find all kinds of parallels to Mormon teaching, suggesting that these ancient peoples were really practicing the one true faith way back when. I was totally blown away, and I wanted to know more. So I bought a translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi library and began studying for myself. It very quickly became clear to me that this guy was a 5-time gold medalist at the cherry-picking Olympics. Yeah, the passages he quoted were there, but there were a lot more passages which they were just either absolutely contradictory to Mormon practice or just outright bizarre. Most of it was just strange. And I realized that he had counted on everyone simply taking him at his word and never looking into things for themselves. His assumption was correct. They would do that because they were already wanting to believe. That bias allowed them to suppress their doubts and simply accept whatever this guy said. Likewise, Dennis was speaking to an audience who just wanted to be backed up. They wanted a defense, and they got one in the form of a murderous monarch of whom God approved, or at least tolerated. No one in that audience was there to question, to say, wait, are you saying that we should accept known murderers as heads of state because God did? And Prager himself never questioned the idea because he'd already accepted the premise that the story of King David was true. That's simply how a perfect God does things in Mr. Prager's mind. And you don't question a perfect being, especially when it comes to questions of right and wrong. If God is said to have done it, it must be okay, even if the story of God doing it is entirely fictional, even if it's genocide. Don't question. Don't think. We have an answer. So long as your primary interest is in feeling good, any answer that warms your cockles will be embraced, and thinking will do you absolutely no good, even when you've spent your entire life imploring others to think a second time.